Welcome to Making Our Way Forward, a podcast where we share compelling life stories and learn from the experience of everyday entrepreneurs. At NACCE, we celebrate diversity and invite you to join the conversation as we talk to entrepreneurs and leaders from all walks of life. We hope that by telling their stories, we bring you inspiration, empower you to take action, and ignite entrepreneurship in your community.
Okay, welcome to Making Our Way Forward. My name is Jeff Smith, and I am Director of Innovation and Equity here at NACCE, and I am here with my co-host, Dr. Rebecca Corbin, President and CEO of NACCE. And we are also here with our wonderful guest, Toy Hershman. We are so excited to have Toy here. She is a wonderful friend. She works for EntreEd, and we have done a lot of great things together. But we're here today to focus on Toy and her work. We want to know more about her. We want to know more about what motivates her, her aspirations, her dreams, and her vision. And so I am actually going to turn it over to Becky to kind of introduce us a little bit more to Toy and to get this conversation started.
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, Toy. Good morning to all of our listeners around the world. It's a pleasure to be with you. We are finishing up a really moving, deep conversation this morning that we're going to touch on some concepts. But I wanted to begin, Toy, before we hear a little bit about you, to share an experience that we had together a couple of years ago now that was just wonderful. And it was one of those accidental experiences when you embark on something and you have no idea what's going to happen. So you and I spent a couple of days in Southern Ohio at Hocking College in this delightful 1920s bed and breakfast as part of our work together at EntreEd. And one of the things I loved about that is Hocking College in Southern Ohio is part of the Appalachian region. So there's, great beautiful natural resources, but need down there and some great challenges. And I remember us going to Hocking College and celebrating with them. They were one of the first to receive a designation that you'll talk about later. But what I remember most about that experience is you and I having coffee together and talking in this living room of this bed and breakfast. And I thought how fortunate I felt that we weren't sitting in a big hotel across the table. We were really becoming friends at that time. And through the pandemic, we haven't seen each other as much. So I would just love for you to share a little bit about Toy Hershman, who you are, the special person that you are, and the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for having me today. This is really exciting. I've interviewed you both on the EntreEd Talk podcast, and I guess we're going to kind of do a collaboration today. So I might throw some questions at you while we're talking and stuff. But yes, Becky, that was such a special thing because you and I we've been partners on a big Appalachian Regional Commission grant together for some time at that point, and very great, wonderful colleagues, but we never had an opportunity to really get to know each other. And so we were we were accidentally thrown into this. It was the cutest bed and breakfast in Hocking, Ohio. I think it was Nelson Hills or Hocking, Ohio. They're right next to each other. But it was amazing. And we got to just sit and kind of relax and get to know each other a bit better. I'm not sure what you want me to share more about that, but just a little background on me and what I do. I'm a mom of two boys that are amazing, and I share that all the time, maybe too much. And I've been working for EntreEd, which is the National Consortium for Entrepreneurship Education for, I was trying to figure this out this morning, since 2014. So that's pretty cool. And my executive director, Dr. Gene Colson, he has been more than an executive director. He's been my friend for more than a decade. I've known him for a long time through many different iterations of things, and he's just wonderful. But we work nationally, but we have this Appalachian Regional Commission grant. So we work in some of these, like Becky said, these beautiful, beautiful places, but there is a high, it's very rural population, not a lot of resources. And we work in the K through 12 system, whereas NACCE works predominantly with higher ed, but you do some stuff in K through 12 too, which is really cool how you've made that all come together. And so we support K through 12 in entrepreneurship education, and we try to, we have a flagship program called America's Entrepreneurial Schools, and that designation is given to schools who can bring entrepreneurial experiences to all the students in their building during the course of a year. And we have worked with schools, I mean, just the most amazing, amazing schools literally from pre-K all the way up to 12th grade. And then through NACCE, we've been able to interface and work with some colleges as well, which has really been beautiful. And we were at Hocking College. We were awarding Hocking College. They're one of our grant partners as well. They were the first college to receive the America's Entrepreneurial Schools and Colleges designation from us. And Becky and I just had a wonderful time that whole 3-day experience of we were showing this giant banner everywhere. It seemed like we were on tour that day. But the college was so proud because they are just an amazing, amazing community college that has gone out of their way to reach into their school systems in the K through 12. And they have built such a wonderful program. I've told them every time I go up there that I wish I could just retire right now and just go to Hocking. Take every program they have just because it's really a beautiful place. But yeah, Becky and I got to sit down and have coffee and just talk, and we learned a lot about each other and a lot of things that we share in common as well, which was really nice. And it's nice to get to know the people when you already like people that you work with, and then to get them to know them in a deeper way.
Toy, I know you have a passion for creating experiential learning opportunities for people. I just want to ask you, what led you to this space? I know you worked in K through 12, higher education, and also corporate industry arena. But what is giving you this passion to be able to create these experiential kind of learning opportunities for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one of those broken road journey weird things that happen. So, but then you figure out afterwards when you put all the pieces together that it completely makes sense. So I was a mechanical engineer in my first career, and so I have kind of this intrinsic passion for fixing things or breaking things. Really, I don't always fix them once I break them, but I'm happy to break things. And I actually worked in the nuclear industry for some time, and then in fiber optics for some extra time. But it was actually after 9/11, these big things, and I was stuck between Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. I was literally stuck on the road, and my parents were out west in Western Maryland, and so I couldn't go back to work. So I went out there with them, and had cries and watched all of the things, and just kind of came out of that thinking, I just really want to try something different. I didn't feel like I was giving back to the greater good, I guess. And so in this little town in Western Maryland, I said, okay, well, I'll just substitute teach. That's just, I'll just see what that's like. And if I don't like it, then I'll go back and do something else. And I went and substitute taught for one day, and it was really amazing. And the principal called me in at the end of the day, and I said, and I'm thinking, oh no, what did I do? Even at 25, I don't know how old I was. You don't want to be called into the principal's office.
Right.
He said, it was like the middle of November too. And he said, listen, I just had this really weird thing happen, and a teacher's left. You want a full-time job? And I said, when? He said, tomorrow. So I said, yeah, I guess. And I went in, and I had taught math in a middle school in Frederick, Maryland for English as a second language students, which was beyond the coolest experience ever, especially as a first time, don't know anything about what you're doing teacher. These kids just were the most amazing children I've ever met. The only problem I had with them was communication, right? But they helped each other so much because I guess they were kind of all in the same situation together. And so I had these advanced kids that were more advanced in their English language that would help the kids who weren't. And it was just, and the parents were so involved, and it was incredible. And I had kids from South Korea, from Russia, from a lot of kids from South America, and they just all came together. And I thought, oh my gosh, where has this career been all my life? And then the next year, they moved me to 128th graders in a pre-algebra classroom. And then I went, okay, now I understand what's hard about teaching.
Toy, that is such a great story. And as you were talking, and what a great question, Jeff, I was thinking you mentioned pre-K, which caught my attention. What in the world can you teach a pre-K student about entrepreneurship? Are you trying to get them to start a business, or what is your role? As I understand it, you're sort of trying to get teachers to teach in more entrepreneurial ways, as you did with those students. So maybe you could expand on that a bit.
Yeah. So I was always scared of little kids as far as teaching goes. When I started teaching, because I was eighth grade, and then I moved into high school role, and I just didn't know how I could, I didn't have my own children at the time when I was scared of teaching these little kids. But then when I started with EntreEd, I did have little kids, and it was interesting to see how much they understand. Now, the term entrepreneurship is a little bit difficult in the early elementary age, but they do understand, what it means to have a business, what it means to make money. They all understand that. And they also understand what it means to help people, probably, honestly, probably better than their older counterparts, because they're not boxed in by the school, kind of the traditional school system, where you have to, unfortunately, we're still a lot of places in this bubble where your goal is to get good grades and to get to the next thing. And you're so hyper-focused as a high school kid on, what's the answer? I have to know the right answer. And in entrepreneurship, there's no right answer. And that's what I kind of loved about entrepreneurship and that experiential learning process. And that's what I learned through my teaching experience, was anytime I could bring in the real world and bring in these things that were relevant to kids, the learning increased, the motivation increased. I didn't have any discipline problems. And to teach these young kids, I mean, they are just so full of ideas. And I love doing that marshmallow tower challenge as like a lead in to entrepreneurship and innovation and just getting their brains going. And honestly, the pre-K kids, other than the ones that I brought extra marshmallows because I knew they were going to eat them, but but they did the most creative things with these marshmallow spaghetti towers, and their ideas are so free. Pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, their ideas are so big, and so just they don't care what people think. They don't have like this rationalization going on. They're just like, I want to build a spaceship that goes to, they just had these really incredible ideas. And so it's actually easier, I think, to be able to do an entrepreneurial experience as long as you have to know your audience. So you have to get to meet them where they are and know that they're not going to spell entrepreneurship, or they're not going to really want to talk about, Steve Jobs or Zuckerberg or even Oprah. They're more in tune actually to what we like to talk to most kids about, is like the local entrepreneur. And they understand that, this guy owns a grocery store and this mom owns this restaurant, and they get that more intuitively than I think the older kids do sometimes. It's really cool to see. And I feel like that little experience no matter how small it is with entrepreneurship at those younger grades, and then if you can build on that as they go up, they don't lose that. They don't forget that feeling of having a success or having something not succeed and then being able to have the chance to do it again. It's really beautiful. I love those guys, and I was scared of them. So I was surprised when I started working with elementary schools. Like, well, this is great. They're so open and honest, sometimes too honest, but it's fun.
That's awesome. Toy, you strike me as someone who is ideal for, we've been talking to a lot of maker educators, and with your training in mechanical engineering and then your enthusiasm and creativity to be able to engage students, to me, you seem like someone who is ideal as a maker educator. We've been talking about making from both a very broad sense that we are all makers, oftentimes trying to remake our own lives, our communities, particularly like after things that we've experienced during the pandemic, some of the social and political unrest. So I want to pose a question to you about making in that sense. We think about it in terms of healing and even well-being. So in what ways have you been able to employ this passion that you have for making in ways that are related to well-being, that are related to healing and even possibly mental health? I would love to hear that.
Yeah. So I guess a lot of people think that they hear they hear the term making and even like this innovation idea and creativity is a great one. And a lot of people kind of just shut off, I think. And I did for a long time, like, I'm not that kind of person. Even though I was an engineer, I didn't feel like I was particularly creative. I just read papers all the time, I felt like. But I didn't really understand that I had creativity because I kind of thought, oh, that's artistic, and I don't have any of that. And it wasn't until I was older and I discovered, I can do things on the computer that are really kind of cool. And some of my art is really interesting. And I shared with you guys earlier, I've been in therapy for mental health, for OCD. And I actually did some artwork, and it's literally on a showcase and on an OCD website, which is really pretty cool. But I didn't know, like I never thought of myself as creative or even as a maker. And it was really funny because last year, I think I shared on Makeshift that I built a pool in my backyard because of pandemic with pallets, and it was amazing. And I could have used it again this year, but we decided to do something else with it. But even doing that silly little thing was so therapeutic. And just that sense of accomplishment, no matter how small it might have been, was so wonderful. And I think that's that has huge application in mental health. I have a friend who is dealing with bipolar disorder, and she does dance therapy. And that's it's creativity, but it's also a form of making. And I think you guys know this, but to expand, to broaden that idea of making to things that are not just I'm building a prototype for a product, that's making too. But it's this idea that, you're writing a book. You guys have written books now. I really want to talk about that too. But that's making, that's so creative. And anything that you're doing that you're really expressing yourself, I feel like it opens up a whole nother world. And a lot of people unfortunately don't get to see that. And I love when maker spaces pop up that are a little more unconventional, because they're not just for, okay, we're going to help you prototype your solution, but maybe for many different other types of creativity. With the pandemic, all of us had to shift, and I started creating movies for our trainings at EntreEd. And it was fun, but I really didn't like it because the only quiet time in my house at that point was in the middle of the night. So I'm putting on full makeup in the middle of the night to film these movies. And I got this epiphany. I said, I wonder if I can make myself into a cartoon. And so then I learned how to do that. And so now I have these hilarious cartoon toy videos that, and I've actually used them for most of our student facing things that we do, because, and students really like them, but the teachers really like them too. And I would have never in a million years thought that I could do that, but I just started playing with it, and that's kind of what you have to do. And I just find that whenever you give students the freedom to do that, it just becomes, it takes over, and it changes the culture of a classroom. It changes the culture of a school, and it can change a person's life when they realize that you might not be the best student in calculus class or in English language arts or whatever, but and that's hard. That's hard sometimes, because you feel like that's the goal, but especially at the high school level. But when you have a class where you're actually building something and you can be a leader where you might not have felt like one before, I think it changes lives and it changes minds.
Toy, I really love that you focused on opening yourself up. And I think we've talked about that earlier this morning, how we're all doing that. And especially, I think your courage in talking about seeking out help. I think a lot of people suffer silently, and they don't take that step to do that. And it's really interesting. You triggered a memory for me early on in my career, and I shared this with you and Jeff, how I had the opportunity to work for a hospital, a Rogers Memorial Hospital in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, early, on in my career. And one of the things I was doing there was leading the foundation work. But in the process, I had to learn a lot about OCD, mental health, eating disorders. And one of the treatment philosophies was really rooted in art and making. And I didn't realize that exactly until you and Jeff started talking. And one of the things that they would do with the patients that would come in the eating disorder clinic is they would have them lay on a piece of paper, and then they trace themselves. And most of the time they fit sort of that prototype, young, super high achieving girls for the most part. And they would trace themselves, and then they would look at it, because they would look in a mirror, and what they would see in the mirror was not what other people would see. And then they would engage in art therapy, where they would start to draw pictures of what was inside. And I think just kind of being an observer, because my goal was obviously to help support families that didn't have insurance, that needed to get themselves into treatment. But what you and Jeff were speaking about now and earlier about music therapy and art and opening yourself up, and the more that we really lean into making here in NACCE in our work, is just what you said, is writing a book, is making something, singing a song, writing a poem. And I think as a community of makers and doers and leaders and followers at times, we really have to lean into that and be vulnerable and be able to make mistakes and know that we can discuss it, and we can learn from it, and we can move on. So I wonder if you might share with us a little bit about a making project that you're working on that really connects to some of the things that we've been talking about related to mental health. And perhaps Jeff would want to talk about some of the NACCE members that have inspired him through their work as well.
So a friend of mine had reached out. We actually had interviewed him. I'm going to give him a shout out. It's Eric Custer, and he's the book professor. And he has a program, a book creators program, that Amber and I had interviewed him on our podcast, and he had mentioned it. And I said, oh, that's really amazing. I'd love to do that sometime. And then he remembered. So, but he remembered it kind of interestingly at the most perfect time for me to write. I mean, not that I didn't have so much on my plate already, but the way that the program works, it's a slow burn. So, and they walk, so it worked, it's like, we only need 2 hours a week. I'm like, okay, I can do that. So at the time that he called, I had just kind of come through the other side of a very debilitating case of obsessive compulsive disorder, which is funny because I did not know about Becky till this morning that she worked at Rogers, which is a center that I was actually on the short list for attending for a while. And so I finally was able to get the right treatment. It wasn't from Rogers, but it was from a place in Pittsburgh, which shout out to them too. and I met this amazing woman, and she really saved my life. And so all of this was going on the past several years. So I've known for a very long time I wanted to write a book about this, but I didn't feel ready to write a book. I didn't feel creative enough to write a book, certainly. The pool helped with that. But I, I've written grants, like that's like the extent, right? And I'm getting my doctorate. That's totally different type of writing. It's totally different. But it was something I always wanted to do. And I just finally just said, yes, I'm going to do this. And hopefully it'll publish in December. And it's a very deep dive into my experience. And I hope that it will help somebody. But there's honestly, if I think about it, if it wasn't for everything leading up to it and even the pandemic and having to shift into a much more creative and kind of out of the box role and working with NACCE and Makeshift, and there were all of these different things that led up to me going, yeah, I can do that. I can do that too, because I wouldn't have ever before now. So it's really cool. And something that I feel like is happening too in entrepreneurship, and probably you see this as well, that more and more young people are talking about that exact thing, Jeff. Like they're talking about not only mental health and wellness, but just this idea of using entrepreneurship and using innovation and making and creativity to help either people like themselves or people they just, for whatever reason, they have this huge passion for. Like they're identifying these problems. When I was 14, 15, I want to sell something and make money. But they're like, I want to, like, there's this garbage that's always on the side of the road. And how can we get people to not do that? Or, the river is dirty, or this lake, it's all of these kind of big ideas and, these communities that people want to help. They want to work with the nursing home and help them in their facilities, and especially after the pandemic and all of this stuff. And so it's just a beautiful thing that I'm seeing more and more young people think about. That's really inspiring.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I was just thinking, listening to you, and one, I just want to say thank you. Your voice and your story is exceptional, and we appreciate you. I was thinking about the nexus of making and the entrepreneurial mindset, and how oftentimes we get to encourage, you see that space where self-efficacy, the growth mindset, you see people being able to, their social and cultural identities are being formed and shaped as they are able to really engage in these spaces. And just like you said, here we've been able to work personally with a mentoring program that combines both making and the entrepreneurial mindset, and with a focus on helping students to actually be able to develop in that way. And so I wanted to ask you, from what you've learned in your personal experience, what you've learned professionally with being able to, to work with helping K through 12 develop the entrepreneurial mindset and programs, and a lot of that being through making, what do you envision in terms of those experiential kind of instructional spaces that you want to create that is going to help kind of propel that next generation of makers, dreamers, and doers? How are you going to, with your doctoral work, with the book that you're writing, what do you envision as the way in which you're going to use that to be able to create these spaces that are transformative?
Wow. That's a small question.
We think small around here, not really big around here.
So yeah, I'm really glad that you said the word self-efficacy. That is something that I've explored a lot. It's actually one of the measures in my dissertation study. I'm actually measuring using an experiential entrepreneurial course to measure entrepreneurial intentions and self-efficacy and empathy actually over over the course of this course that the students are taking. And I think that those two things, the idea of empathy and the idea of self-efficacy, in my opinion, are the two most important entrepreneurial mindsets. Because I think, opportunity identification, figuring out kind of what you want to do, that's big. But if you don't have empathy towards either when you're a maker, when you're an entrepreneur, you are ultimately building or making something for somebody else or for a population, whether that's a product, whether that's a service, whether that's a book, whether that's a blog, whether that's a course, whatever it happens to be, you're doing it for somebody else. And even if you're part of that population of somebody else's, you can't just sell it to yourself, right? You can't just, you can help yourself, but the idea is that you're doing it for this larger group of people that you're solving a problem for or helping to solve a problem for. And so if you don't have empathy for that group of people, you're not, I don't think you're going to do anything. you're going to be, because you have to get inside the hearts and minds of the people that you're helping in order to really understand their problem and really be able to make a solution that'll work. And then in order to do that though, and once you have the empathy in place and you know what you want to do, then you have to have that ability, that self-efficacy inside yourself to go, the confidence, that feeling of I can do this. And like I mentioned before, like with my book, it's the same process with these, these young people. And I feel like the younger that we start giving them these experiences in making, even if it's on a smaller scale, and they have these ideas. I mean, some of these, even middle school kids are doing things that are blowing my mind, like making prosthesis for people that they're actually using. It's amazing. But even smaller things, just these little experiences in making an entrepreneurship are giving them, I don't want to say little wins, because sometimes the thing doesn't work, right? But then they get to fix it. They get to find out what's wrong with it. They get to talk to people and get feedback. But just those experiences, going through that process from start to finish, and then maybe from back to start to back to finish again, and that's inherently part of making, that is building that self-efficacy. So when that young person goes to college or then it goes into the workforce, and whether that person becomes an entrepreneur or doesn't, that self-efficacy, that idea of, I remember I worked on these problems that seemed really hard, and I was able to work through them, and I was able to solve these things. Those experiences make that person better able to say, yeah, I can do this. I don't know how yet, but I know there's not a wall in front of me that I can't climb over. And that's, I think, what making does, and that experiential learning, it starts to build that self-efficacy in students. And then when you add that empathy component where you're actually doing this making for a real audience, it changes the game. So like, we've been talking about STEM education for 1 billion years, it feels like. And unfortunately, like, I love STEM. I am, STEAM, stream, whatever letters you want to put in it, I am in. But it's, but a lot of times we see STEM sort of done not all the way. So it's this, okay, we're going to build a robot, or we're going to start a campaign, but it's for some, there's no relevant kind of tie-in with the individual students. So there's no, we're building a robot, here's the instructions. And so you have this little experience and you might feel good about, hey, I made this thing work, but you really don't have that next step application where kind of that entrepreneurial mindset comes in, like, well, why did I do this? And then you have STEM kind of done the right way, where you have a kid that's building a robotic hand for a person and they've met the person.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to definitely have you come back on and talk about that, because I think that in and of itself warrants a whole conversation, because I know you have done some amazing work in STEM. You're also, like you said earlier in your career, you were a female engineer, which is a rare thing, and kind of sort of set you on the path for what you're doing. So I know Jeff and I just appreciate you so much. And this has been such a healing conversation, which is really where our podcast journey started. It started as an idea, and our producer, Natalia, and our colleagues at NACCE had brought it to life, but you really serve as an example and leaning into your own empathy and efficacy. I can't wait to learn more too about your research. So I want to thank you so much for being with us. I like to think this is the beginning of many more conversations. I hope you and I get a chance to travel together at some point this year too, because you are such a special person. So I want to thank my co-host, Jeff Smith, our producer, Natalia, and especially you, Toy, for really opening yourself up for this healing conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becky, Jeff, Natalia. Thank you for having me on. This was wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that listening to this podcast will help you to explore the many ways we might define entrepreneurship. Join us every other Wednesday for more episodes as we celebrate opportunity, learn from one another, and grow together. Subscribe to this podcast, connect with us on social media, and learn more about today's speakers at nacce.com/podcast. We look forward to making our way forward together with you.
Have you heard about our latest book, Impact Ed: How Community College Entrepreneurship Creates Equity and Prosperity? This is our roadmap for building back better in 50 states and globally. In each chapter, we share the inspiring stories of everyday entrepreneurs and explain how community colleges play a crucial role in their success. Visit us at nacce.com/impacted to order your copy now and join us in this work.